In a quiet village nestled near the edge of a dense forest, there lived a young girl named Meera. She was not like the other children her age, who often found their joy in toys, schoolbooks, and the rhythms of family life. Meera's world was a little different. She had a fascination with nature, an innate sense of connection to trees, rivers, clouds, and every bird or creature that made the forest its home. While the other kids might have feared the dense woods and the occasional eerie cries of wild animals in the night, Meera found comfort in it. Her days, when free from school or chores, were spent wandering the forest trails, collecting pebbles, or lying under banyan trees watching the filtered light dance through the leaves. One summer afternoon, while walking deeper into the forest than she usually dared, Meera heard a rustle in the bushes. At first, she froze, the way any child would when something unknown moved nearby, but her curiosity was always a little stronger than her fear. She crept forward slowly, her bare feet soft on the warm earth, and parted the thick green leaves. There, tangled in a snare made of rough rope, was a small monkey. Its dark, intelligent eyes locked onto hers immediately, not with aggression, but with an unmistakable plea for help. It didn't scream or bare its teeth. It simply sat there, breathing heavily, its leg caught in the makeshift trap probably left by a hunter. Meera felt a surge of compassion. She knelt down and whispered soft words, unsure if the monkey understood anything but hoping her tone would soothe him. Carefully, she approached and inspected the injury. The rope had bitten into the monkey's ankle, leaving behind angry red marks, but it didn't seem broken. After a few tense minutes of slowly untying the knots, during which the monkey never moved away or showed signs of fear, she finally freed him. He leapt back slightly, testing his leg. Meera stood still, heart pounding, wondering if he would bolt. But instead, he just sat and looked at her. That moment became the beginning of a most unusual friendship. The monkey, who Meera began calling Chiku, started to follow her. Not like a pet trailing its master, but like an equal who had made a choice to stay near. Chiku never ventured into the village, always stopping at the forest's edge, as if he instinctively knew that Meera's world and his own were meant to stay separate. But Meera found herself returning to the forest daily. Each visit brought more moments of quiet companionship. They played hide and seek, tossed fruits at each other, and sometimes just sat in silence. It was a bond deeper than words, something neither of them understood logically, but both felt with certainty. As weeks turned into months, their friendship became the stuff of local curiosity. Other villagers had seen the monkey in passing, swinging from tree to tree, but never thought much of it. But they began to notice Meera returning home later and later, her clothes sometimes torn from playing in the trees, her face smeared with dirt but glowing with happiness. Her mother, concerned, began asking questions. Meera, worried they would separate her from Chiku if they knew the truth, only spoke vaguely of playing in the woods. Seasons shifted. The rainy monsoon came, and with it, the forest turned lush and wild. Chiku would often appear soaked, his fur matted from the storm, and Meera began to bring him dry fruits and old towels from home. Sometimes, she even sneaked into the kitchen to take food she knew her mother would miss. Chiku learned quickly how to open banana peels, how to mimic Meera's laughter, even how to gesture with his hands. In many ways, he seemed more like a child than an animal. He would climb trees only to drop mangoes down to Meera, or wait until she turned her back to playfully tug her braid. Their games grew more elaborate, their understanding more nuanced, but the forest was not a playground. It had its own dangers, ones that even Meera, with her natural affinity, could not ignore forever. One day, while wandering further than ever before, they came across a jagged clearing. Chiku had gone ahead, scampering up a tree while Meera admired the view. That's when she saw it, a rusted metal trap identical to the one that had caught Chiku months ago, this time with a small bird lifelessly caught in it. Rage surged in her chest. Who was setting these cruel traps? Why? Chiku, from above, gave a shrill cry and pointed deeper into the woods. Meera looked, and far off she saw a figure. A man camouflaged, crouching and watching. A hunter, fear set in. Meera grabbed Chiku's hand and they fled. Branches whipped past her face, roots threatened to trip her, but all she could think of was the memory of Chiku's leg in that rope, the pain in his eyes. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, Meera collapsed onto the ground, panting. Chiku hovered over her, fussing and chirping with concern. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities. What if that hunter had seen Chiku? What if he set another trap? What if next time Chiku wasn't lucky enough to be found driven by this fear, Meera did something bold? She told her grandfather, an old man with stories of the forest stretching back to his youth, about the traps. She didn't mention Chiku, only that she had seen a man setting snares. Her grandfather nodded gravely. He told her of a time when animals were more respected, when villagers only took what they needed and left the rest. He promised to speak with the village elders. Within days, a warning was sent out, urging people to report anyone found laying traps, and patrols were increased in the outskirts. Still, Meera was cautious. She and Chiku changed their usual meeting places, opting for deeper, less obvious spots. Their games grew quieter, their hours together fewer, and yet the bond between them only deepened. There were days when Meera spoke to him as though he were her own age, sharing stories of her life, her frustrations with school, the loneliness she felt, her dreams of seeing the ocean someday. Chiku would listen, his eyes wide and attentive, as though every word meant something. Then one day, Chiku didn't show up. Meera waited as usual near their banyan tree. She called softly, clapped her hands in their secret rhythm, even offered her favorite guava, but the forest stayed still. The usual chorus of birds seemed muted. Something was wrong. For the first time, she felt the true weight of the bond they shared. Not having Chiku, there was like missing a part of herself. She wandered the woods for hours, calling, searching. When night fell, she returned home with tears streaking her cheeks. The next few days were torture. Her heart ached with a fear she hadn't known was possible. And then, almost a week later, he returned, limping again. His fur was ragged and a fresh cut ran across his shoulder. Meera fell to her knees, crying as he slowly approached. He nuzzled into her arms and sat still while she cleaned the wound with water from her bottle. Whatever had happened, he had escaped it, but barely. That night, she made a decision. She didn't want Chiku to live in fear. If he couldn't live in the forest safely, and he couldn't live in the village either, what kind of life was that? She began researching, asking around. She learned of animal sanctuaries, not zoos, but places where monkeys could live safely in nature, free from hunters and cages. But she also learned it meant saying goodbye. Sanctuaries were far away, and once Chiku was there, she might never see him again. The thought tore at her, but she knew, if she loved him, truly loved him, she had to choose what was best for him. For days, she struggled. Each visit with Chiku became bittersweet. They would sit together, and she would try to memorize everything, his expressions, the sound he made when excited, the way he tilted his head when confused. Eventually, with help from a local wildlife volunteer, arrangements were made. A team would come, examine Chiku, and if he was healthy, he would be transported to a large protected area where he could live among others of his kind, with trees to climb and no hunters to fear. The morning of the departure was quiet. Chiku seemed to sense something. He clung to Meera tighter than usual, and she held him, tears falling freely. The team arrived, gentle and understanding. When the moment came, Meera kissed his forehead, whispered that she loved him, and watched as they carried him away. Days passed. Then weeks. Life returned to its routine, but something in Meera remained changed. She still walked the forest trails, but they felt emptier. Yet in her heart, she knew she had done the right thing, and one day a letter arrived. The sanctuary had accepted Chiku. He was healthy and already adjusting. They sent photos, Chiku swinging in trees, surrounded by others, his eyes bright. Meera smiled through tears. Their friendship had changed both their lives, and even if they were apart, the bond they had forged in the forest would never truly break. Time passed in the quiet village, as time always does. Meera grew older. She still walked the forest paths, still looked up into the branches of the tall trees with a flicker of hope that somehow, impossibly, Chiku might come leaping down from the canopy, chirping his familiar sound. But the forest, though full of life, had a silence in it now that only she noticed. It was not empty. Birds still sang, the wind still rustled the leaves, and the occasional rustle in the bushes still made her pause. But there was no Chiku. And yet, in his absence, he was more present in her thoughts than ever. Every leaf reminded her of the way he used to toss them playfully at her. Every branch became a memory of where he had perched, watching her with curious eyes. Meera didn't forget. She couldn't. And in some ways, she didn't want to. Her friendship with Chiku had changed her. It had given her something rare. A connection that defied the boundaries people often built between species, between the human world and the natural one. As the months stretched into years, Meera found her purpose beginning to take shape. The forest that had been her playground, the place of laughter and friendship, now called to her in a different way. She began to see the small signs of damage, plastic wrappers along the river, trees marked for cutting, the disappearance of birds she used to hear every morning. These things didn't just upset her, they stirred something deep in her heart. She knew she had to act. She began volunteering with local conservation groups, learning about native species, ecological balance, and how villages could coexist with forests. People listened to her not just because of what she said, but because of the passion behind her words. Her connection with Chiku had taught her more than any book could. It had taught her empathy, patience, and above all, the simple but profound truth that every living creature, no matter how small, wild, or misunderstood, deserves to live freely and without fear. But not everyone understood. Some dismissed her as a girl chasing childhood fantasies. Others thought she was too emotional, too attached to things they saw as unimportant. Wild animals were just animals, they said, meant to be hunted, captured, or ignored. But Meera didn't back down. She knew what she had lived. She knew the trust she had earned from Chiku had not come from a fantasy, but from real, shared experiences, from kindness and consistency. One day, while working with a conservationist team to track illegal poachers in the northern part of the forest, Meera found herself in a part of the jungle she had never explored before. It was deeper, denser, with vines hanging like curtains and strange bird calls echoing from above. The mission was simple: scout the area, take notes, identify any signs of recent activity. But as the team fanned out, Meera's instincts led her down a narrow trail. Something in the air felt familiar. She couldn't explain it. Her feet moved before her mind did. Then, as if pulled by memory, she reached a grove of ancient trees, their roots twisted like thick ropes over the forest floor. The silence here was different, not empty but full of potential. And then she heard it, a sound so familiar her heart skipped. A high-pitched trill followed by a rustling in the trees above. Meera froze, her breath caught in her throat. Slowly she looked up. There, swinging with effortless grace, was a monkey, not just any monkey. Chiku, older, a little larger, but unmistakably him. His eyes met hers, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. He paused mid-branch, staring. Meera raised her hand slowly, her lips trembling into a smile. "Chiku!" she whispered, not daring to believe. In a blink, he dropped to a lower branch, then another, then leapt onto the ground in front of her. His movements were slower, more cautious than before. But when he tilted his head and made the same chirping sound she had heard 1,000 times, tears filled her eyes. She knelt, and without hesitation, Chiku came forward and hugged her. It was a reunion that neither had expected. The sanctuary, it turned out, had established a semi-wild conservation zone connected to the forest. Chiku, like many others, had been released into this safe zone, protected from hunters but still able to live freely. Meera learned this from the team when she brought them back to see him. The news spread quickly. Her childhood story, once dismissed, now became an example of the incredible possibilities that arise when humans treat animals not as threats, but as friends. From then on, Meera became a regular visitor to the protected zone. She began documenting Chiku's behaviors, his interactions with other monkeys, his habits and moods. She wasn't just observing a monkey, she was watching her old friend thrive in a way she had only hoped for. And in doing so, she began to dream bigger. What if children all over could learn what she had learned? What if the next generation didn't grow up fearing wildlife, but understanding it? She started a program for local schools, bringing students into the edge of the forest, teaching them about ecosystems, biodiversity, and conservation. But she didn't just lecture them. She told them stories of how she had met Chiku, how their friendship had grown, and how it had changed her life. The children listened with wide eyes and open hearts. Some even asked to volunteer. Slowly, a movement began. More villagers became aware of their role in protecting the forest. Some began picking up litter. Others helped report suspicious activity. What started as a friendship between a girl and a monkey was now reshaping a community's relationship with the wild. But Meera knew the work was never really done. There were still challenges. Political interests that wanted to exploit the forest, developers eyeing the land for roads and resorts, and poachers who still found ways to operate under the radar. But she faced these threats with a resolve born from love, not anger. She spoke at town meetings, lobbied for stricter protections, and continued her education, studying environmental science with a focus on human-wildlife relationships. Chiku remained a constant in her life. Though he no longer followed her around like before, he always came when she visited. Sometimes, they would sit together under the very same banyan tree where they had first met, now located within the protected zone. Meera would bring him his favorite fruits, and he would entertain her with his mischief, tugging at her scarf, jumping on her shoulder, or simply curling up beside her in quiet companionship. It was a friendship that had matured, just as they had. One monsoon season, when the rains were particularly harsh and floods threatened the forest boundaries, Meera and her team worked day and night to protect the sanctuary. They built temporary shelters, moved injured animals, and rerouted water flow. During one of these missions, Meera slipped on wet ground and injured her leg. She was stuck, alone, unable to move. Night was falling fast, and the storm made it hard for anyone to hear her calls. But Chiku found her. As if sensing her distress, he appeared from the trees, chirping urgently. He tugged at her clothes, pulled at her hand, and when she winced in pain, he climbed a nearby tree and began making loud, piercing calls that echoed through the jungle. Moments later, a rescue team arrived, drawn by the sound. Chiku stayed by Meera's side until she was lifted onto a stretcher and taken to safety. It wasn't just a friendship anymore. It was loyalty. It was love. Lying in her bed later, leg in a cast, Meera looked out the window and thought of how far they had both come. She had been a child looking for connection, and he had been a wild creature in pain. Together, they had bridged a gap that most never even tried to cross. They had found a way to meet, not as human and animal, but as soulmates in the oldest sense. A bond forged in trust, tested by distance, and sealed in the kind of shared moments that define lifetimes. Years later, Meera wrote a book. She called it The Monkey Who Sat Beside Me. It told their story, not as a fairy tale, but as a lived experience. It became widely read, translated into multiple languages, and even included in school curriculums focused on environmental education. But for Meera, the book was more than a career milestone. It was a tribute. A love letter to a friendship that had shaped her beliefs, her path, and her purpose. And still, every now and then when the sun dipped low and the jungle bathed in golden light, Meera would make her way to that same banyan tree, fruit in hand, heart full of anticipation. Sometimes Chiku came. Sometimes he didn't, but she never stopped coming. Because in the rustling leaves, in the swaying branches, in the distant call of a monkey echoing through the forest, she always felt him near. Time, as it always does, moved forward, taking with it the innocence of youth, but leaving behind the golden imprint of memories too strong to fade. Meera, no longer the child who once wandered barefoot through forest trails, had become a woman known not only in her village but in regions far beyond. Her name was now attached to conservation projects, educational reforms, and environmental advocacy movements. But through all her accomplishments and growth, there remained a quiet, unchanging part of her heart that still belonged to a little monkey named Chiku. It was in that part of her soul that the friendship truly lived, untouched by time, protected from the erosion of change. The forest, too, had changed. Some areas had grown denser with protection, while others had suffered under pressure from urban expansion. But thanks to Meera's constant efforts, many parts of the sanctuary zone where Chiku lived had been preserved. She often visited, sometimes with students, sometimes with fellow researchers, but more often alone. Those were the visits that meant the most. It was during one such visit, early in the cool morning just after the first winter frost, that she sensed something different in the air. The forest, usually alive with chatter and rustling, was unusually quiet. Even the trees, heavy with dew, seemed to stand still. Chiku didn't come that morning. Meera waited. She sat by their old banyan tree, laying out guavas and jackfruit pieces like always, brushing a gentle finger across the bark as if it still held the echoes of laughter and footsteps. But no rustle came from above, no familiar sound. Hours passed. She walked through the trails he frequented, called softly in the rhythm they had once shared, but the forest responded only with silence. Her heart felt a coldness deeper than the morning air. The next day she returned, and again the day after that. Still, Chiku did not appear. Finally, she asked the sanctuary workers. A gentle-faced caretaker who had worked closely with Meera for years approached her with a solemn expression. His eyes said it all before his words even came. "He passed away, Meera," he said gently, as if afraid that the sound of it might hurt more than the truth itself. "A few days ago, old age, peacefully, he was surrounded by others. He wasn't alone." Meera stood still. It was not the kind of grief that bursts suddenly. It was the kind that blooms slowly, almost quietly, like a vine wrapping itself around your chest. She nodded, pressing her lips together as tears welled in her eyes. She didn't ask to see his resting place. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned and walked to the grove where they had shared so many memories, the tree that had been their meeting place, their sanctuary. She sat there for a long time, alone but not lonely, feeling the weight of an absence that was also somehow full of presence. As the wind picked up, rustling through the leaves above, Meera closed her eyes. She remembered every detail. The first time they met, his injured leg and fearful eyes, the way he learned to trust her. The games they played, the fruit he tossed at her from above, the way he hugged her when they reunited after years apart. And most of all, the way he made her feel, not like a visitor to the forest, but a part of it. Not like a child playing with an animal, but like a soul who had found a companion in another being who spoke no words but understood everything. The next few weeks passed in a haze. Grief, when mixed with gratitude, is a strange and sacred feeling. It doesn't paralyze, it deepens. Meera found herself looking back not with despair, but with overwhelming appreciation. How rare it was to have loved something wild and to have been loved back. How extraordinary it was to have shared years of life with a creature from another world and to have met in the middle as equals. She poured herself into her work. The story of Chiku's passing was shared across networks of conservationists and environmentalists who had known of their bond. Tributes poured in. Some sent photos they had taken of Chiku, unaware of how precious they would become. Others wrote poems, painted murals, or simply sent messages. Meera read everyone, each message another affirmation that her friend had not only touched her life, but the lives of countless others. Eventually, Meera started a new project, one she had dreamed of for years but never had the courage to begin. She called it the Wild Bridge, an initiative aimed at fostering friendships between children and animals through guided forest experiences, storytelling, and observation programs. It wasn't about taming or owning animals. It was about learning to coexist, to respect, to connect. Children from all over the region came. Some were hesitant at first, others ecstatic, but each child left a little more thoughtful, a little more in tune with the world beyond walls. At the heart of the program was a small shrine-like space under the banyan tree. Not a religious shrine, but a place of memory. There was a carved wooden sculpture of a monkey, eyes full of mischief and kindness. Beside it sat a bench, where children could sit and listen to stories told by Meera and other mentors. The tale of the girl and the monkey was always first, the story of how trust, once given freely, could grow into a love that changed the course of lives. Years rolled on. The sanctuary grew. Meera's work expanded to other forests. She began advising national conservation policies and traveling across the country to speak at events. She never married. She often said she had already found her soulmate, and he just happened to be covered in fur and full of bananas. People laughed, but there was always a soft silence afterward, as if something in the truth of her words lingered. And then, many years later, when her hair had silvered and her steps had slowed, Meera returned once more to the tree. This time, she came alone and moved more slowly, but her eyes still carried the light of her youth. She sat down quietly, watching the sunlight flicker through the branches. Around her, new children played in the distance. Some climbed trees. Others looked through binoculars, laughing and pointing at birds. Meera smiled, content in the knowledge that the world she and Chiku had dreamed of was not only real, but growing. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of earth and leaves. A soft breeze passed through, rustling the leaves in the same gentle rhythm Chiku used to make when climbing above her. And for a fleeting second, she imagined him there again. Just out of sight, just close enough to feel, and perhaps, in a way, he was. Because some friendships are not bound by time or species or distance. Some friendships are made of something stronger, of trust given when it was least expected, of care shared without expectation, of memories so deeply rooted that they live on in every breath of wind, every rustle of leaves, every child's laugh echoing through a forest trail. So ends the story of a girl and her monkey, but it does not end in sorrow. It ends in continuity, in legacy, in the quiet truth that love, once born in kindness, never really dies. It only changes form, and sometimes it swings through the branches.